Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. Today we're going to be talking about the eighth house, doing a very deep dive on the eighth house. And I have a guest joining me. His name is Frederick Woodruff. And if you have not seen his videos on my channel or on his Substack, you're in for a treat. He is so fun and knowledgeable. He's been an astrologer, I don't know for how many years, but longer than me, and I've been an astrologer for over 20 years. So very, very knowledgeable. He's available for readings. His Woodruff cast on Substack will be put below. So I highly, highly recommend that you subscribe to that. And if you're not a Substack person, he does post the videos he does on YouTube as well. I just watched one today. And he just wrote a book called I Love You, Jeffrey Dahmer. If you want to hold that up, Frederick.
Well, this is the galley. So once this gets edited, the book will be out in the public. But yeah, it's very eighth house.
Very.
So yeah.
He kind of explores Jeffrey Dahmer's life. It's fictionalized, but he also looks at the astrology. So really kind of juicy and interesting if you're interested in crime novels as well as astrology. So we're going to put information for that so you can get on the pre-order list. So basic information here. First of all, welcome, Frederick.
Thanks, Dabney. Always great to be here. I have a blast with you whenever we connect.
Frederick just always makes me laugh. So what makes me seriously, I'll watch his episodes of the Woodruff cast on his Substack, and I'll just burst out laughing. And then oftentimes you'll see me comment with what I laughed about, because there was something that just made me laugh out loud. And often it's quite dark humor. It's not, it's not even sarcasm. It's just dark. And so we both were kind of talking beforehand that we have something in common, which is we both have Mars in the eighth house. And so that may be part of that sort of dark humor. But let's set the stage. If you're not familiar with the different houses in astrology, I have a beginner astrology video that I will link. And then also you can get my free astrology workbook and download that.
Cool.
That will tell you all about the houses. So that's just the kind of top line. If you're new to astrology and don't know about the houses, this is going to be all about the eighth house. So I'm going to stop talking. You want to set up your thoughts about the eighth house.
Well, so my background goes, my teacher was Ivy Goldstein-Jacobson. She came from the traditional school. So the eighth house has this very ominous, it's the house of death. It is related to sex, not pregnancy like the fifth house is, but sex. And
version.
General within Hellenistic astrology, it has negative connotations. It's about disappointment, sorrow, death, grieving, and so there's that school of thought. And then of course the psychological school brings in transformation, rebirth, things like that to the mix. But before I start, I want to recommend this book by Deborah Holding. She's a traditionalist, very hardcore from the UK. And I have my students always have this in the syllabus for them, because the houses, temples of the sky gives you where the hell how the houses came to be from Mesopotamia time, to now. And she explains the importance, and I tell my students this as well, keep the houses separate from the associations with the signs. Because, there was a phase in the 70s, I think it started with this astrologer named Zip Dobbins, where it was the zodiac alphabet, it was called. And so the first house and Mars and Aries were all clumped together. Second house, Venus, Taurus, second house clumped together. And Deborah points out why the error of doing that, that the houses are very much distinct from the signs. And I think that's an important distinction to make for people. Um, the other thing I'll add is the mystery of the eighth house. She helps understand that in this book, because if you think about it, why would you go from like career, vocation, achievement at the 10th house and then move to the ninth, and then in death, you're dealing with death in the eighth house. And she explains this journey of the sun around the wheel from the ascendant up to the midheaven. And then as soon as it hits the midheaven and makes this descent, the ancient astrologers saw that as a weakness and a kind of downfall.
When I teach my courses, I actually do sort of associate them and help people understand that the houses are not the same as the planets and the signs, but there is some resonance. So I think it is, to your point, it's very important that they're delineated about what they each mean. But coming after the seventh house, which is the house of marriage, and it is Libra, it is that relationship, the I thou. If you take it as there is some relationship with, because I think like each house, just like each sign in some ways, is a reaction to the one before it. There's just this like seventh house, like partnership and getting married. And really, once you get married to someone or you have a relationship, you start to realize that that is the death of your individual self, right? And there is this kind of next level of intimacy that if this is going to be successful, if you're good, and as part of your journey, it's the mirror. So the seventh house being the mirror, and the mirror is what shows you what you have to deal with. And then the eighth house is, are you ready to deal with it? And so that's where it becomes about power and sex and death and, money. So that's sort of how I was taught. So what do you, like when I describe that, does that resonate with your thinking, or is it kind of just a different way of looking at it?
No, it does. It does, especially once I encountered, say, Liz Green's teaching, Stephen Arroyo, that they took this approach that you're mentioning there. So I'm very familiar with that.
Do you want to talk about, you want to start with maybe the planets that are in the eighth house and, natally, and we can sort of talk about, yeah, let's start there actually, and then we can kind of move through. But, like I said, I have Mars in the eighth house. I have a moon in the eighth house. People watching probably, if we were doing this live, they would be chiming in with all of their different placements. So let's
Sure.
take a couple planetary, just the planets, and stick them in the eighth house. And I'd love to hear what you think about that and what, what
Well,
that means for people.
sure. Obviously sun and moon there, there's going to be a much stronger emphasis, I think, than the planets for obvious reasons, with the lights being the forces that they are in astrology. One thing I will say about the eighth house is that if a person doesn't have some kind of a relationship with what's the word, like therapy or counseling or psychoanalysis or anything that takes them off the conventional path of life and starts them looking at undercurrents or things that are taboo or occult or esoteric, that planet, chances are it's not registering in their psyche. Like it's like too much for them. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there has to be, well, that sounds kind of absolutist, but I think it's helpful if there's an opening within the person to going off the beaten path when they're questioning, what is my life? What is life? What's it all about, Alfie? That kind of a thing. So, yeah. So I think
Yeah.
sun and moon being in the eighth, that would be very critical for the person to be aligned with that kind of curiosity and inquiry, that they want to go pull up the floorboards,
Oh,
see what's down there, even if it's scary and unnerving. Did I
yes.
freeze?
You did freeze, but you're back. So that's good news. Um, I agree with you. So, as I was saying before, I think the eighth house, there is a level of intimacy. And I know Stephen always says that intimacy, is like we're taking our clothes off, but then real intimacy is what's naked even beneath that, right? So it's that like really seeing into another person. And so when you have a sun in the eighth house, the difference to me between a sun and a moon in the eighth house is the sun in the eighth house can be more outward facing. Like you might be more interested in other people's underworld and getting
Mm-hmm.
to the bottom of like there's
Mm-hmm.
something about your own ego identification that you are the detective, you are the investigator, you're the one who wants to get people really raw. And so in some ways that can be a great placement for a counselor because you can really bring consciousness and attention to those deeper wounds that people may not be aware of. I think with a moon in the eighth house, what I've seen from my clients is a little bit more of an inward facing, wanting to work on themselves. I've seen kind of more the investigate, like it's almost like, the moon helps you feel secure. And so there is something like, I had a boyfriend once and we went to therapy and he's like, you think this is fun? Like, and that was like, he was like, this is like torture for me. And like, you just think this is fun. And,
Mm-hmm.
and he was right. Like, I don't think it's fun. Like, I'm not skipping to therapy, but like, there was this sense of like, that like fulfilled a need in me to get to the bottom of what was happening with both of us and myself. And so whenever I have done anything therapeutic, there is this sense of like it does fulfill an emotional need versus I think like an ego identification, which I've seen with sun in eighth house being more kind of identified with power.
Mm-hmm.
Have you any thoughts on that?
I jibe with the points you're making there. I think another way that I look at it is if a planet's in the eight, the traditional or conventional ways of interpreting the planet have to die off, and then there's this other element arises. It's just like if like meeting a person that has a healthy relationship while they're alive and acting out their life with death, like they have
Yes.
integrated it somehow in their life in a mature way, and then they're very much an unusual or very differentiated kind of person. Because think about it, we basically keep death at bay because of our instinctual drives to, survive and keep going. But it's also a form of denial because you can't say life without saying death, and you can't say death without saying life. It's this coin, right? So
Mhm.
I think planets there, um, I'm always curious when I work with clients with eighth house placements because I want to know how are they bringing a new facet to whatever that luminary or planet is, because they've gone through some kind of a death thing, either by addiction or going into therapy or uh, whatever, the kind of different obsessions that come with like an eighth house. I mean, my Mars is in Pisces there. My Mars, like yours, is there as well. And I would not be the person I am today without my struggles with addiction. You like when I was younger and having to gone like down, down, down the classic line and 12 step. You have to hit the bottom before you come back up, and that no one else can do it for you. That's very much to me like a Mars in eighth, where you learn this whole other facet of what the planet Mars is about, right? So all of those, I would say through my life, all of those different Mars Pisces themes have been like this like double-edged sword for me, like the whole thing with addiction and psychedelics, and then coming to the other side of the coin with that, also with pornography and crime. I mean, not necessarily that I'm involved with it, but it fascinates me. I mean, you're going to write a book called I Love You, Jeffrey Dahmer. That's a Mars in Pisces in the eighth house right there, right? So,
100%.
so, but do you see my point about it's like bringing forth other parts of the luminaries or the planets that aren't conventionally acknowledged because of these weird underworld journeys that the eighth house connotes.
I love the eighth house personally. Now, as I say that, I do know that people who have strong eighth house placements often are not unfamiliar with trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can be the trauma like of a literal death of it can be, like you said, addiction, it can be sexual abuse. Like, I mean, trauma is definitely interwoven into the eighth house. Now, this is interesting. I appreciate you sharing your sort of what you see as your Mars in Pisces journey. My Mars in Leo journey is very different. I've never had addiction issues. However, I have had issues with, so
I'm dying for this.
well, so here's the thing. So I had, those who watch my channel know that I grew up in a very I had a lot of trauma and abuse growing up. But I kind of always saw it very clearly. Like I always sort of knew it wasn't my fault. Whereas a lot of some people sometimes get confused, they internalize things. I think that the Mars gave me a very strong ego sense and courage. So it's this double-edged coin. Like I'll get comments, and I know I'll get comments on this video. Stop, you talk too much. Your ego you need to check your ego. Okay. So I think there is a little bit of that, like my big personality that is Mars and Leo. And it is and there's various other placements, but attracts attention that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes is unwanted. But I think it's the courage of Leo, the positive, which helped me survive poverty and abuse and those kinds of things. So I think they're always this sort of double-edged sword. I think it drew attention to me, and it drew
Mm-hmm.
attention to me as a a lightning rod. And it also was the thing that was like my ego wouldn't let me give up. And so I just kept going. And it was like I was determined to get to the bottom of what my life is really about. And I did do tons of therapy. I did a vision quest up on a mountain and starved myself for 4 days. Like, there is kind of this, and I learned astrology, right? Like,
Well, I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, you as an astrologer is such a Mars, Moon, eighth house combination. It's such a beautiful way for that to be expressed. Because anytime you're putting a chart up with somebody, you are basically they're giving you permission to deep dive their psyche.
right.
And this is when you really hope you have an ethical astrologer that you're working with.
Yeah.
People forget that. I mean, when people come to an astrologer, they're going to the oracle. So that archetype is constellated. And then they're like the supplicant, or, they're in a vulnerable position. And I think someone with like, especially moon in the eighth can really be sensitive to how that configuration is honored and played out ethically. you know.
Yeah. So many of my friends, my closest friends, whenever I get to finally see their chart kind of thing, or people I just automatically connect with, they all have moon in the eighth house. It's
Mm,
just been repeated over and over again because I do think there is this fascination with something deeper than what we get on TV, right? Like there is this real draw, like people with eighth house placements are drawn to what makes people tick and like the real. And I think that they're the people that when they walk into a room, they can see who just, had a fight, or they could see these little undercurrents
hmm
of social dynamics, and it interests them. So that's kind of one of the things with the eighth house that is a gift. But to your point, that can be abused.
Right. Now, this brings up kind of an interesting segue that I think we'll get back on if you want to go beat by beat,
No, we don't
Mercury,
have to do
Venus.
every planet. I was just
Well,
wanting
I
to have a
mean, your
conversation.
listeners might enjoy that, but we'll see. But it just reminds me the train of thought that we're on right now, which is acknowledging a lot about the power associated, at least that I associate with the eighth house, if the individual has that component within him or herself to go deep and be interested. Otherwise, I do think position placements there are sort of fuzzy or off the radar. And this is where the Hellenistic take on the eighth house is interesting because they see it as weak. They
Okay.
see it as diminished in force. They see it not making any kind of aspect to the ascendant, which means it's like offline and not in the conscious mentation. So
Mhm.
it's weird. I can see it from two different schools. I get it, like if the person's just kind of a nebbish, sorry, but just sort of like kind of clomping through life and not really asking the big questions, and they've got something in the eighth house, it probably is not registering because it's not an aspect, anything to the ascendant. But on the other hand, I think if somebody has those occult, esoteric, fascinations that the eighth house connotes, psychotherapy or whatever, it's like boom, really potent. And I learned in depth, and this is the great thing about studying your own chart through transits. And the mystery I felt around having Mars not only in the eighth, but fuck, it's in Pisces, which is like, what is, like going with. Thank God I discovered the Tao because that's kind of like the perfect Mars and Pisces kind of merger. But when Uranus transited through Pisces some years back, right when it hit my Mars, I was in Maui at a spiritual retreat and I almost drowned. I was out doing a great swim, and then this undertow or current just like had me sucked out to like I could see my life passing before my eyes. Because if you've ever been caught in one of those kind of tows or whatever, you can be swimming to save your life and you're not saving it. You're losing oxygen and going under. And that I was like, that really like brought up the death element and the Mars and Pisces element of for me, the eighth house. And the other interesting thing was through that transit, because you know how Uranus is, it's kind of slow. So it was moving back and forth on my Mars. I became absolutely obsessed with warfare, which and never in my life had I just didn't like sports. I didn't like boy things. I didn't like rough and tumble shit. But I got so obsessed, especially with the American Civil War. I think I spent a year down that rabbit hole of every permutation of what that war was about. That was very Mars. And then the Uranus sort of awakening to this facet of myself, which I'd always kept in an eighth house way out of the picture, that the traditional male boy expressions of Mars just never interested me as a kid. I was a reader, introvert, artist, stuff like that. Um, so that's two examples. I mean, do you remember transits to your Mars that
Well,
like
Frederick, you may know this story, but Uranus squared my Mars in September, and we had an engine fail on a plane.
I do remember we talked about that.
And
Yes.
so similarly, like my life may really not have been in danger, but there was no indication that it was not. There was no communication. And so, I was with my family. It was in my fifth house, Uranus squaring my Mars in the eighth. And it was like we were preparing for death, and I had my child sitting right next to me.
And there's
It's
fifth
very
house,
weird. There's the
your
fifth house.
child, the way he was impacted by that, I can see that link there too.
Right. And so, this it's interesting that we both have Mars in the eighth and Uranus touching that set off a near-death experience in some way.
Yep.
And so whether or not we really were going to die, we felt like we were going to die. We did have the whole like, well, I need to prepare myself in some way. And it's interesting to think about, Uranus as this catalyst. And if you have an eighth house placement, it might be more dramatic if it's Mars, but not necessarily, right? And having a catalyst where you have to get that, it's like, where have you not seen your life clearly? What
Hmm.
do you have to, it's like, where do you have to, for us, it was in a way, where did you have to find courage? Like, where do you have to do something differently? That's always what Uranus wants you to ask, like, where are you not being authentic or true to yourself? And for you, sometimes I associate the eighth house as a water house, and then you have it in Pisces. The eighth house does have some really deep links with ancestral lineage. I know that's more the fourth house, but and the 12th house is your ghosts, right? But the eighth house is really kind of the it could even just be your own family's DNA that of trauma, like the trauma lineage, maybe is what,
Hmm.
and so you talking about, American Civil War came to you, like with, you couldn't really let that go. It makes me wonder, like, if you believe in past lives, were you in the Civil War, or did you have ancestors that fought in the Civil War? And there was something about that, was a break for you, that, it just, that was going to be the symbolism.
Yeah, I to that question, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, my ancestors were in the US for a while, so there's probably someone was in that war, you
Yeah,
know.
it's just interesting to think about like how it manifests, and like where, like epigenetically, like we could have had some sort of message encoded into us where it's like,
Yes.
war's bad, and like I'm for peace, and yet so you separate from that part of yourself, and then
Hmm.
have this sort of near death experience where it's like, I need to learn about that. I
Yeah.
need to understand it more, and that's very eighth house.
Yeah. I would say too quickly that that sojourn into the Civil War really informs for me still how I view where the United States is situated right now. I see the Civil War as never having been resolved, and we're still in it basically today. It's just that's how long it takes generations to shed things. It just this country's so young,
Yeah,
you know.
100.
So,
Well, and then the whole world is sort of on fire, and we are certainly at the forefront of it. So,
yep.
yeah. So I guess for people watching, having a planet in the eighth house to me means there is something that grounds you there. I love what you said about the fact that, because there are two ways to go, and it is all about consciousness, because you can have a stellium in the eighth house and not ever go deep,
Mhm.
stay on the surface. And that may be of no fault of your own. It could be conditioning from society, society is much more open to eighth house topics in recent decades. But that stuff, there's been a long history of burying and, not talking about, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about sex. Like, therapy was very taboo. Like people were just sort
Mhm.
of, the eighth house got shunted away to the 12th house sanitariums.
But also, I mean, if you look at the culture's obsession with horror and thrillers and true crime and tabloid disasters, it's closest reach into the eighth house for people. You know,
It is
it's
amazing how popular that stuff is.
well,
And you
because it's
can't.
taboo and it's an easier, I think it's the popularity gives the person a sense that, well, I went in to see Friday the 13th, part five, and I knew it was just entertainment, but I still got the thrill of this gore and guts and whatnot. And then I go home and, put the dog out and I'm back to life as normal. So it gives brushes of eighth house type themes, but doesn't really touch anything deeply other than curiosity, and like I say, tabloid, baseline tabloid interest in things.
Right.
But
There's no work in watching a Dateline special about somebody else murdering their spouse.
well, not consciously, but I think there's something at play that is worming its way as the person's watching that true crime show. There's something trying, especially if they have a planet in the eighth house, there's something trying to worm its way in there and make a visceral connection with this very real part of life, death, disaster, mayhem, murders.
Yeah.
It's not like a common everyday occurrence in your neighborhood, but it is a part of life, a part of nature. So that's another thing about the eighth house. It does awaken a person to this facet of nature, that's very impersonal and, it doesn't have any morals,
Right.
you know,
No, it's really interesting. I think that you bring up a good point that I think the attraction to that, which has become so widespread,
huge.
in some ways, there is like a trying to understand. And in the absence of actual, the rise of it kind of in some ways coincides with the rise of the isolation, right? The lack of true intimacy, the lack
Mhm.
of, the ultimately you need another there to help guide you through the underworld realm, right? Like if you're
Yep.
down there on your own, you just get lost and it pulls
Mhm.
you down. And so, as society has changed and as there is this rise and people just feeling very isolated, there is maybe a divide in their consciousness and not this conscious awareness that they actually have things within themselves that need to be explored versus just trying to feel better about themselves that isn't their life. Dark night of the soul, kind of the Persephone journey, is often associated with the eighth house. Do you associate it with the eighth house as well?
I can see those elements to it. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in particular with that myth, but it does make sense for sure. Um, eh, Deborah Holding connects those houses together as uh, the second house represents like coming up out of Hades from the nadir at the
Okay.
bottom, and then the sun is moving back up to new life with the ascension, and then the second being opposite, or the eighth being opposite the second, it pulls some of that second house theme of going underground, or rather the opposite of being coming up out of the underground. Eighth house denotes starting the descent down eventually. It's an interesting kind of theory, but she defines eighth house a lot by it being opposite the second. So,
Yeah.
your possessions are the second house, your partners are the eighth house. you know, like when they pass on, you inherit their material wealth or things like that. So there's that dance between the second and the eighth house. So yeah, I can see the Persephone dimension of it.
Yeah, it is. So that's the thing with the eighth house. And I hope we're helping people because it is complicated. So I think there's validity. So because I come from a much more like, evolutionary, like what's it all about, modern perspective. But I think there's value in those traditional astrology teachings because think about the eighth house, like I have a moon in the eighth house and there's inheritance from the mother. There is like financial stuff really does sit in that eighth house as
Hmm.
well
Hmm.
because it and so if you have sun or moon, to Frederick's point, really, really important to recognize how truly powerful you are on an emotional level and on that kind of deep level. Like, don't just skirt the surface of life. Like, there is an importance for you to do your own work, like they say, um, and explore alternative ways to getting there, whether it's through plant medicine or through breath work or deep therapy. Like it's not necessarily the therapist that you pay through your healthcare account, you know like you may have to find kind of alternative routes to actually take you down and have someone help guide you through those depths because
Hmm.
there's such richness for you there. And then
So
if
that's so, go
Mhm.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and then the
Well,
other personal planets like Mercury, Venus, um, and Mars, those are important as well. They're more nuanced and give you a flavor of what that like where you may need to go down into the depths. It's not as integral to, they're not the sun and the moon. So
right. Well, I was to that point, I was going to say you could look at each planet as a particular figure, like Mercury in the eighth house, making that that being a representative of guiding the dead to the next part of their life, which Mercury and Hermes did,
yeah.
in mythology, or looking at Venus as like Ishtar and what she endured by going into the underworld, as she emerges as the morning star again. So that I think a lot of those myths are fitting. I think Mars in the eighth definitely is the connected to, well, like I shared, kind of the carnage of warfare and understanding that kind of friction in life that's unavoidable. I mean, we all want peace, love, and understanding,
But
but
violence exists.
Mars, and it has, I think, as gruesome as war is, I think if you take like this bigger bird's eye view of life on Earth, the warring factions serve some kind of a function that forces people out of their tribalism. Do you know what I'm saying? Because on one hand, it's tribalism that creates war, but then war often it mashes people together. Where I remember there was a story about World War II soldiers. If they were Italian, they were the worst soldiers because they would fall in love with maybe like, a woman in another country that they were fighting and then go AWOL, which I love that about it. But my point is it's that alchemy that the destructive quality of war forces some new kind of merger. And as awful as it seems, it does seem to be archetypal, as James Hillman wrote about with war, where it's just somehow in our species and we can't get out of it, I guess, until the robots turn on us, and then we'll like get a new
Well, and then
facet of it.
that's like a whole other story. I don't even know where that fits in, but I
What
do.
well go what I'm just so what about Saturn? Let's look at Saturn in the eighth quickly.
Saturn in the eighth. Let's think about that. Okay. Well, one of the things that had come up into my mind is there is it's pragmatic. Like you think about the lion chasing the gazelle and just tearing it to shreds. And there's just something very primal and like pragmatic, like about
With
the structure of
Saturn
life.
in the eighth, you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. I
There
see
is,
that. That's like Jupiter and Saturn in the eighth are like when I have clients with that, I s- I suggest to them that they have something to teach us out of their own personal experiences with mortality or meditations on death or whatever, that they can be like an elder of some kind to help people into this facet, facing this facet of life, that things die.
I've seen a
It's
lot
like,
of clients with or friends with Saturn in the eighth that have had a lot of sexual partners. And in some ways, I think that there is a, an ability to distance sexuality from intimacy, and but yet
mm,
wanting to explore it with Saturn. Like,
mm-hmm,
like there's a compulsion
mm,
there to have sex and to explore sexuality and intimacy, but also like a fear of it that keeps it at the true intimacy at bay. So
mm-hmm.
there's kind of this sort of push pull. So I've seen a lot of
Wow.
that, like at least earlier in their lives,
Huh.
that is something that like is a challenge for them, just like any other Saturn placement. That like the first Saturn return can be like it forces them into a reckoning of any behavior that's not authentic to themselves. And so there's no way shaming anyone who's had a lot of sexual partners, but I'm just saying that's one
Sure.
of the expressions that I've seen, because Saturn is a fear. So there may be a genuine fear of the darkness, there may be a genuine fear of going deep, that actually is their ultimate gift, to your point, to become
Uh-huh.
that elder, to then guide other people. But I don't
Hmm.
think it happens naturally, easily, or overnight.
But that's interesting about it sounds like a counterphobic approach to your point about Saturn related to fear and defensiveness that uh is like, well, counterphobic, like, Evil Knievel was like counterphobic, like he would drive his motorcycle over 60 cars in a line to prove. But I guess so
Yeah.
that could be part of that kind of compulsion with Saturn. I think that's very interesting. I mean, I have Saturn and Scorpio, and I know it's not in the eighth house, but there is some kind of resonance, I would
Mhm.
say.
Yeah, there's always like there's themes in common in
Yes, but I think, yeah, I can relate to that in my own personal trajectory of really going deep into sex.
Mhm.
And in fact, I'm going to put my OnlyFans page up for people today. I'm kidding.
Oh my God,
Um,
Frederick, I really like was like, oh my God, is he really gonna send me an OnlyFans page?
well, no, I have a grandpa OnlyFans site that I do, but
I like there would be a lot of people into it, Frederick. Like you could do the
believe me, not that I do it, but there are. I mean, it's
like
crazy. The OnlyFans story, that's a whole other podcast we'll do. But anyway, I love that about because there's a steeliness to Saturn that, yes, it's like wanting to hold on, not transform, which the eighth house is about, but then there's the muster. Well, what about like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in the eighth? I'm curious to hear some inquiry into that.
Traditionally people have talked about this, like whatever the eighth house means, if let's, give it the very like buckety, sex, death, money, power, secrets, right? Uranus is
Occult.
the occult. So Uranus is there to actually challenge you to be as authentic as possible in that realm.
Hmm.
So if your authentic self is not heterosexual and you have Uranus in the eighth house, there is more of an aptitude to explore your own personal curiosity of that spectrum. It may also manifest in something like being comfortable with, working in a funeral home. Like there's kind of this like you have to be authentic to yourself with Uranus wherever that placement is, and it's some place where you have a gift to help show those around you, or those, you're part of the zeitgeist when you're in the outer planets. And so it's your part of your role as a part of the collective, I think, is to be this sort of authentically eighth house person. Like where that
Hmm.
fits for you, it's just unique to each person.
Yeah, I would add to that that's like the iconoclast, Uranus in the eighth, and also like something I'm hoping to see soon, like, assassins, I think have like, Uranus in the eighth, that bringer of death through some shocking, you know,
Mhm.
adventure or whatnot. So that can be taken literally or metaphorically about the assassin. I mean, it can be the assassination of something that's time and the culture is done, and you're there to clear the stage and, blow this out with that Uranian energy. I think Neptune in the eighth, I always get pictures of like mediums and Ouija boards. And I'm not making light of that. I find that fascinating, but that ability to be sort of like a conduit into the occult esoteric realm, or things like the Golden Dawn, or these traditions that have always carried, made that uh, connection to that lineage of Hermetic arts or whatever. So I think that's a strong Neptune. Also, the healing components of uh, Neptune in the eighth, that level of compassion that can arise dealing with like trauma with others or the culture. Again, some healing capacity. I think Pluto in the eighth has that as well, though it's a bit more like, you know, a lot more to wrangle with Pluto in the eighth.
Yeah, with Pluto in the eighth, I've definitely seen people with, that's a psychic placement. It's people who actually are really powerful and in touch with potentially the other realms, or have the strength to do their own work. But if it's not conscious, if it goes the dark route, it's people that can be quite destructive. But if it goes the healthy route, these are people that really make a change, and can hold
Hmm.
some powerful truths. So
Yeah.
that's the outer planets. Uranus, the other thing is like finances, can be up and down, and there can be windfalls of money. There can be, like, because I think that second eighth house connection
Hmm.
is is true for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point with that.
Yeah.
The I was just thinking about Pluto in the eighth again, about because as you were saying, so much of it kind of depends on the sign that these outer planets are in, because that does put it into the cultural or collective framework of what is being transmitted or disrupted or reborn or destroyed, given the different outer planets. But so when it's in the eighth, it's like a going to your Saturn in the eighth thing. There is like I think the importance of understanding obsession and compulsion is critical. I mean, it's generally in our society that's seen as aberrant or neurotic, or it needs therapy, but it's like that thing John Waters said, without life is nothing without obsession. And I I think because my Mars is in the eighth, maybe I understand that better, because you need, well, the outer planets, the giving free rein to what they're about, which is kind of dangerous because they're so disruptive, it can turn into a compulsion and an obsession. And whenever I work with people with the outer planets and the eighth, I'm curious, like, what is it that you're most, well, not passionate about, but obsessed with, or compulsively going to, because that's giving a hint of something about how that outer planet is wanting to impact the culture. And then hopefully they have other elements in their chart that, they can access their self, bring it into the personal level and express it somehow.
Oh my gosh, I
So
make me want to look at David Lynch's chart, because to me, the eighth house is a David Lynch movie that has so many truths that can bring you so much um, knowledge about other people, but you have to weed through these layers of just crazy, challenging imagery.
yeah, the dream Bardos and the dream realm and stuff. I
Oh,
mean, Mulholland Drive definitely was a good example of that.
yeah, that was actually one of my favorite ones that he did. And it gives you like, I don't really know what I got out of that movie, but I've watched it multiple times and it was so visceral. Like it brought tears to my eyes. It was compelling. So it was like you are doing therapy in some ways, because what anytime you're shedding tears, you're releasing pain.
I would give that film a Venus and the eighth connotation, because
Yeah.
like you, I never had like a clear, direct, conscious, oh, this is what this film is about and what it means. But the little that I gleaned, because am a Lynch aficionado, what I gleaned listening to him talk about Mulholland Drive, and he never gave a lot to anybody about stuff, but he did allude to this is like a trajectory of the feminine in Hollywood, and what the feminine undergoes, and these different indignities and different transformations and things like that. And that's why I would, to your point about Lynch and eighth house, I would say, yeah, Venus in the eighth there for sure.
Yeah,
I don't know his chart. I don't know his sign
I
or
don't either,
stuff.
but I'm gonna
That's
have
for
to,
another show.
yeah, I'm
We'll
gonna
go
have to
into
look it up. So I think that you can kind of go, down the signs and have a similar, we gave a couple examples with Pisces and Leo, you know, really what are the high side of each sign? What is the shadow? And really understand that you're gonna the shadow, you're gonna get dragged into the shadow of the sign that's in the eighth house. And your mission is to pull it into the aspiration. It's to go down into the underworld like Persephone and bring the gifts back up.
hmm
Whatever, so you can, like I said, I'll put a link to where you can download my free astrology workbook, and you can look at just the vocabulary, because that will give you, so whatever your eighth house is, that'll give you some sense of what you're here to work on and what the gifts are with that eighth house for you.
Yeah, and I would add, like, in the simplest description, the eighth house is like one of life's ultimate reality checks, meaning death exists. There it is. Like, you know, that's it. And get on board with it, people.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is then they're like, then there's the next house after it, because then it's a rebirth. Like death and rebirth exist together. And so it's a
Right.
literal death. So that is the mortality piece of it that we all, and I have seen people with really strong Scorpio or eighth house or Pluto placements have to grapple with a lot of death in their life, more than their fair share.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have to be literal. It can just be emotional death.
Yes, though it will eventually be literal.
It will for everybody.
My Saturn and Scorpio has to like make that case.
Can you
Keeping it real.
can you tell him that he's gonna die someday? Because he's having a hard time with that one.
Who?
Peter Thiel. Well,
Oh my God, I thought you were talking about Trump. My God, I'm like,
no,
no, Trump's invaded this video cast. My God, I can't get away from
you
that.
did it. You did it. You always say no MAGA, and then you always do it. I am so happy that we have South Park now. Give us
Riley,
And
did you
they're
see the
giving us
new
an
one?
eighth house. That's an eighth house show. South Park.
Yeah.
Like there is no rules. Like it is all just in your face. And so that, oh my God, Vance's tattoo. I died. So funny. You have to watch it if you haven't. At least
No, the Christy Nome one.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just like
Okay,
Vance's
now
tattoo.
we're MAGA.
That was my favorite. Okay, so we are all living in a Bardo or a David Lynch movie right now, but on a personal level, I hope that everything that was said about this eighth house comes across as we mean it, which is constructive. There is no shaming for anything that happens in the eighth house. The eighth
No.
house it's stripped raw, it's the reality, and it's the place where you can find your greatest wisdom to then move out into that ninth house and share that with other people. Because boy, the dark night of the soul will take you down.
And the ninth house will help you publish your memoir.
That's right. And also it will help you, with the knowledge that you gained from Almost Drowning, write a book about Jeffrey Dahmer that may be inspirational for other people
Right.
to not kill and eat other people. So,
Well, that doesn't happen in my book. My book is a reworking of history. So it's like
good.
somebody that meets Dahmer, falls in love, and interrupts what turned out later would have been a death spree. But anyway, yeah, it's
And
a whole
also,
different
as
take.
someone with an eighth house moon, I can actually watch out for this eighth house comment coming. I can have compassion for Dahmer because he tried to get help in so many ways and he was turned down at every, no one helped him.
Yeah,
And
and there's a Venus in the eighth house, which he had.
yeah, there's Venus in the
The
reaching
love
out
of
to people.
death. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that goes very bad. So eighth house, we've really gone down into place here. So, but still the book sounds incredibly compelling. I encourage everyone to sign up if you're interested. And definitely Frederick is a fountain of knowledge and just also makes me laugh. So I would suggest
That's a great combination of things. So I'm honored to have that all clumped together. Jeffrey Dahmer, laughter, and fount of wisdom. Hey, Dabney, thanks so much for having me back on. I love your shindig here. I think you're doing such a great job for astrology.
Oh,
Bravo. Bravo.
Thank you. And we'll have to do an outtake at some point and tell everyone what happened with the fashion episode.
No.
All right.
I'm not getting AI involved. Great. Good seeing you again. We'll talk soon.
Take care. Bye.